What would you do if your HOA president treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom, handing out ridiculous fines, enforcing absurd rules, and making life miserable for everyone, except herself? For years, Ethan had enjoyed the peaceful charm of Maplewood Estates. It was a quiet, picturesque neighborhood where everyone minded their own business, waved politely in the mornings, and helped each other out when needed. That all changed the day Karen became the HOA president. Overnight, it was as if the community transformed into her private fiefdom, with her acting as an iron-fisted ruler. At first, it was just annoying. She sent out long-winded HOA emails full of bold, underlined, and red-highlighted text reminding everyone of important community standards. Then came the ridiculous fines: $50 for grass that wasn't exactly 2 inches tall, $100 for a mailbox that wasn't the right shade of beige, and a staggering $200 penalty for using non-regulation Christmas lights. Ethan once watched as a neighbor got fined because their trash can sat at the curb an hour longer than HOA policy allowed. It was as if Karen had nothing better to do than patrol the streets looking for tiny infractions. At first, Ethan avoided trouble. He paid his dues, followed the basic rules, and stayed under her radar. He figured as long as he didn't attract attention, he could live in peace. But then, strange things started happening. Packages went missing. Not just during the holiday season, when porch pirates were common, but year-round, even in the middle of spring. It wasn't just Ethan either. Several neighbors mentioned their deliveries mysteriously disappearing. The HOA, of course, had an answer. "It's those teenagers," Karen said one evening at an HOA meeting, shaking her head with exaggerated concern. "I keep telling everyone, we need surveillance cameras on every street. But no one listens to me." Karen, as always, positioned herself as the only one looking out for the community. She blamed local kids, the mail carriers, even the HOA board for ignoring her calls for more security. But something about her insistence didn't sit right with Ethan. It was too convenient. Too rehearsed. And then, one day, Ethan became the next victim. Ethan didn't like jumping to conclusions, but when his own package vanished, he knew something was off. He had been waiting months to order that gaming headset, checking prices, watching for discounts, finally pulling the trigger when he found the perfect deal. The tracking number said delivered. But when he stepped outside, there was nothing on his porch. At first, he went through the usual checklist. Maybe the delivery driver left it at the wrong house? Maybe a neighbor grabbed it for safekeeping? He double-checked with the shipping company, even knocked on the doors of nearby houses, but no one had seen a thing. That's when he remembered his doorbell camera. Ethan pulled up the footage and played it back, scanning for anything unusual. The delivery driver arrived right on time, walked up to the porch, and neatly placed the box down. So far, so normal. The driver left, and for a few minutes, everything was quiet. Then, the camera picked up movement. A figure appeared, short, hunched slightly forward, moving with stiff, purposeful steps. They glanced around, as if checking for witnesses, then bent down and snatched the box. Ethan's stomach dropped. He rewound the footage, zoomed in, and there it was. The hoodie obscured most of the person's face, but there was no mistaking that posture, that walk, that entitled air. Karen. The sheer audacity almost made him laugh. The same Karen who terrorized the neighborhood about keeping property up to standard. The same Karen who nagged everyone about security and blamed missing packages on teenagers with no respect. And yet, here she was, caught on camera stealing from her own neighbors. He considered confronting her outright, but something told him she'd deny everything. Play dumb, deflect, maybe even accuse him of making things up. No, if he wanted justice, he needed something undeniable. Something she couldn't twist or talk her way out of. That's when Ethan came up with the trap. The plan was simple but effective. He put together a fake package, using an old shoebox filled with packing material to make it look like a real delivery. Inside, he hid a GPS tracker, one of those tiny devices people used for keeping track of keys or wallets. But that wasn't the best part. Underneath the packing material sat a die pack, the kind used in bank robberies. Once opened, it would explode in a cloud of bright blue ink. Ethan set the package right in the middle of his porch, making sure it was impossible to miss. Then, he waited. It didn't take long. Karen was predictable, and that was what made this so satisfying. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Ethan watched from his window, peeking through the blinds, heart pounding in anticipation. He didn't have to wait long. Karen crept up the walkway, glancing left and right in the most painfully obvious attempt at being sneaky Ethan had ever seen. If it weren't so infuriating, it would have been hilarious. She bent down, snatched the box, and hurried away, straight toward her house. Ethan pulled out his phone, opening the tracking app. A small blinking dot moved down the street, heading directly to Karen's front door. He let out a slow exhale. Got you. For a moment, he debated calling the police right then and there, but no, he wanted her to open it first. He wanted her to experience the full glory of what was inside. Ethan stood, stretched, and made his way outside, strolling down the sidewalk at a leisurely pace, giving her just enough time. When he reached her driveway, the GPS marker stopped moving. The package was inside. He stepped up to her door and knocked. A muffled rustling sound came from inside, followed by a sudden, loud pop. Then, a shriek. Ethan grinned. Showtime. The door swung open so violently that for a moment, Ethan thought Karen might rip it off the hinges. She stood there, frozen in place, her face contorted in a mixture of shock, rage, and pure humiliation. She was completely covered in blue dye, her once perfectly pressed beige sweater now a streaky, splotchy mess, her blonde hair tinged with electric blue, her hands trembling as she wiped at her face, only making it worse. The ink had seeped into her skin, staining her arms, her neck, her fingers. She looked like a smurf who had lost a fight. What the hell is this? She screeched, flailing her arms, sending flecks of dye onto her already ruined doorstep. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning casually against the doorframe. Oh, that's what happens when you steal other people's packages, Karen. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I didn't steal anything. I found it on my porch. Ethan raised an eyebrow and pulled out his phone. The GPS tracking app was still open, displaying the precise route the package had taken from his porch to her front door. Huh. That's weird. Because this little dot here says it was on my porch 5 minutes ago. And now it's here. In your house. By now, the commotion had drawn the attention of several neighbors. People stepped out onto their lawns, some whispering, some openly snickering at the sight of Karen, who was still dripping blue ink onto the pavement. Then, the final nail in the coffin. Mrs. Whitaker stepped forward, holding up her phone. Actually, Karen, I have something to add. She tapped her screen, and a security camera video played. The footage showed Karen sneaking onto her porch last week and swiping a package right off the doorstep. Another neighbor chimed in. And mine, too. I never had proof before, but now, well, this is amazing. Karen's face paled, or at least, it might have under all the blue dye. She pivoted instantly, her fury turning to outrage. This is harassment, she snapped, her voice shrill. You people set me up. You planted that box. You're trying to make me look bad. Ethan chuckled. Karen, you stole a booby-trapped package from my porch. You made yourself look bad. But Karen wasn't done. Her eyes narrowed as she whipped out her phone and jabbed at the screen. I'm calling the police. This is an attack. This is illegal. Ethan shrugged. Go for it. By this point, the crowd was barely holding in their laughter. They all knew exactly how this was going to go. When the police arrived, Karen launched into a full-blown tantrum, waving her blue-stained hands as she ranted about how she was being set up and how Ethan had entrapped her. But it didn't take long for the officers to piece together what really happened. Ethan calmly handed over his phone, showing the GPS evidence, while Mrs. Whitaker and the other neighbors played their security footage. One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, sighed and turned to Karen. Ma'am, are you aware that stealing mail is a federal offense? Karen stiffened. I was just. Ethan smirked. Just what? Just stealing from half the neighborhood? The officer shook his head. We're going to need you to come with us. Karen let out a horrified squeak as the officers moved to escort her toward their car. No. This is a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president. The officer barely glanced at her. Not anymore, ma'am. As they led her away, the neighborhood erupted in applause. Some people even cheered, while others stood in stunned silence, soaking in the unbelievable scene of Karen, once the untouchable tyrant of the HOA, now being carted off in the back of a police cruiser. Ethan should have felt like the battle was over, but something nagged at him. Karen had always acted untouchable, so why was she so confident even now? The answer came the very next day, when the HOA board held an emergency meeting. The room was packed, neighbors buzzing with excitement, waiting to hear the official announcement. One of the board members, an older man with a stiff expression, stepped forward. We regret to inform everyone that Karen will no longer be serving as HOA president. A wave of relief swept through the room. Someone actually clapped. But then, something strange happened. Instead of moving on to discuss the future of the HOA, the board members looked tense. They exchanged nervous glances, shifting in their seats. Ethan's stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. Then came the bombshell. A neighbor named Greg, who worked in finance, stood up, holding a stack of printed documents. His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of fury beneath it. You all might want to see this, he said. I went through the HOA's financial records last night, and guess what? Karen wasn't just stealing packages. A murmur rippled through the room. Greg slapped the papers onto the table. She was stealing money. Silence. Then, whispers. Someone gasped. Ethan leaned forward. What do you mean? Greg's jaw tightened. HOA fines. The ones Karen kept issuing to people for nonsense reasons? They were supposed to go into the HOA's community maintenance fund. He pointed at the records. But look here, thousands of dollars just disappeared. And guess whose name is attached to every unauthorized withdrawal? The tension in the room shifted from relief to outrage. The HOA board looked unnerved, clearly caught off guard. We had no idea, one of them stammered. Ethan narrowed his eyes. They were lying. Karen may have been arrested, but now a much bigger scandal was unfolding. She wasn't just an obnoxious HOA president, she had been running a full-blown scam. And worst of all, there was no telling who else had been involved. The room buzzed with whispers as the weight of Greg's words sank in. Karen wasn't just a petty tyrant with a clipboard and a superiority complex, she had been robbing the entire neighborhood blind. And the worst part? The HOA board, the very people who were supposed to keep things in check, had either looked the other way or been too scared to stop her. Ethan scanned their faces. They looked nervous, too nervous. If they had truly been blindsided by Karen's embezzlement, wouldn't they be angry? Outraged? Instead, they sat there, stiff, glancing at each other like kids caught cheating on a test. Then, the real betrayal came. One of the board members, a middle-aged woman named Linda, who had always been one of Karen's most vocal supporters, cleared her throat and stood up. "Look," she said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "We understand that mistakes were made, ***. Mistakes?" Greg snapped. Thousands of dollars just disappeared. Karen was fining people for trash cans and flower beds while she was stuffing HOA money into her own pockets. Linda raised a hand, trying to calm the rising tension. "And that's exactly why we need strong leadership. This neighborhood has been through enough turmoil already. We need stability." Ethan's stomach twisted as he realized what was happening. They weren't talking about fixing anything. They were talking about bringing Karen back. A few board members nodded in agreement, looking far too comfortable considering the circumstances. Someone from the crowd scoffed. "You have to be kidding. You want to reinstate her? After everything she's done?" Linda's smile didn't waver. "Karen made some, let's call them questionable decisions, but you can't deny she got things done. This neighborhood has rules for a reason. And quite frankly, I don't think we should make any rash decisions based on a personal vendetta." Ethan felt his blood boil. A personal vendetta? Karen had literally been arrested for stealing mail. She had ruined people's holidays, stolen their money, terrorized them over things as ridiculous as grass height, and now they were trying to paint her as the victim? A new wave of anger spread through the crowd. People shouted over each other, voices rising in outrage. "She was a crook. She fined my grandmother for using the wrong shade of paint. I had to pay $100 for excessive Halloween decorations last year." But then Linda played her last card. She let out a slow, dramatic sigh, clasping her hands together like she was some kind of martyr for justice. "Look, no emotions are running high, but let's be honest. Without Karen, this neighborhood is falling apart. Just this past week, I've noticed people getting sloppy. Trash cans left out for longer than usual. A few driveways with weeds. Someone even parked an RV in their driveway for 2 days." Ethan almost laughed. An RV. That was the emergency. Linda shook her head in disappointment. Karen kept this neighborhood beautiful. Without her, it won't be long before this place starts looking like some rundown, rule-free mess. That's when Ethan realized, this wasn't just about Karen. This was about power. These people didn't care about the stolen money, or the stolen packages, or the fact that Karen had humiliated herself in front of the entire neighborhood. They cared about control. Without Karen, they had no one to enforce their petty, power-hungry fantasies. That's when he knew. They weren't going to stop. Unless someone stopped them first. Ethan stepped forward. "So let me get this straight," he said, voice steady but sharp. "You're telling us that even after Karen was caught, on camera, stealing packages, even after she was literally arrested, even after we found proof that she was stealing HOA money, you still want to put her back in charge?" Linda didn't blink. "We're considering all options," she said smoothly. "We think she deserves a fair hearing before any decisions are made." Ethan took a deep breath. "Fine. Let's put it to a vote." A hush fell over the crowd. The HOA board hesitated. Clearly, they weren't expecting that. Ethan turned to face the neighbors. "If you want Karen gone for good, if you want a real election, not just some shady board decision, then sign a petition. We'll demand an official vote. And we'll make sure that Karen, or anyone like her, never gets that kind of power again." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Mrs. Whitaker nodded and stepped forward. "I'll sign it," she said firmly. Then, another neighbor. And another. And then the floodgates opened. People lined up to put their names down, some shaking their heads, some muttering angrily about the HOA board. The momentum was undeniable. Linda looked like she had just bitten into a lemon. "This is highly unorthodox. So was stealing thousands of dollars, Ethan shot back. It was over. The HOA board was backed into a corner. There was no ignoring the sheer number of people demanding change. The board caved, announcing an official election for a new president and voting out every last one of Karen's allies. But Karen? Karen was still out there. And she wasn't done yet. Ethan realized that the battle wasn't over when a letter arrived at his doorstep the next morning. The envelope was plain, unmarked. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in a cold, formal font. The HOA is weak. The neighborhood needs order. Change is coming. Ethan read the letter twice. Then a third time. His gut told him one thing. Someone was trying to take Karen's place. With Karen gone and the HOA board dismantled, a wave of relief swept through the neighborhood. For the first time in years, Maplewood Estates felt like home again. People smiled more, chatted freely on their porches, and finally did what they had wanted to do for so long, rebel. It started small. A few flamingos appeared on Karen's abandoned lawn, a silent tribute to all the ridiculous rules she had enforced. Then came the wild door colors, neon blues, fiery reds, even a bright pink one just for fun. People planted, banned, flowers, set up garden gnomes in absurd numbers, and for the first time ever, left their trash cans out an extra day, just because they could. Ethan sat back and watched it all unfold from his porch, sipping his coffee, enjoying the quiet satisfaction of a well-earned victory. The tyranny of Karen was over. Or at least, it should have been. But that letter still sat on his kitchen counter. He picked it up again, running his thumb over the smooth paper, rereading the cold, ominous words. The HOA is weak. The neighborhood needs order. Change is coming. The unsettling thing wasn't just what it said, but who had sent it. Karen had been taken down, but there were others like her. People who craved control, who saw rules not as a way to help the community but as a way to dominate it. Ethan exhaled slowly, setting the letter down. He had thought the battle was over. But maybe it was just the beginning. Because in neighborhoods like this, there was always another Karen waiting in the shadows. Have you ever had to deal with an HOA nightmare? Or a Karen who wouldn't leave you alone? Share your experience below. I bet someone out there has a story even worse than this one.